Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment to order. My name is Jackie Jacobson. I'm the MLA for Nunavut and the chair of the committee. I'd like to thank Minister and staff to be here. I'd like to, Mr. Clerk, are there any additions to add to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair. There's one item on the agenda today, which is the clause-by-clause review of Bill 3 and Act to amend the Public Highways Act.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, hearing no changes to the agenda, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Ms. Knockleby, thank you. Move the adoption of the agenda. Motion is in order to all those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Having reviewed the adoption of the agenda, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Today, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment continue a public hearing on Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act. Bill 3 has received second reading in the Legislative Assembly in March 13, 2020, and was referred to this committee for review. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's media channels to respect physical and distancing requirements. Witnesses attending by video conference. I'd like to remind all members and witnesses all comments, questions come through me is directed as the chair. I'll now ask members to introduce themselves for the record, starting with MLA Bonchouche.
Ron Bonchouche, MLA Decho.
Katrina Knockleby, MLA for Great Slave.
Alan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Thank you, members. Now I'll invite the Minister of Infrastructure, the Honourable Diane Archie, to introduce herself and her staff to proceed with the opening comments that they may have. Thank you. Ms. Archie.
Thank you and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. With me today is Steve Ludit, who's my Deputy Minister for Department of Infrastructure, and Jacques Roberge, who's Senior Legislative Advisor with the Department of Infrastructure, and Sherry Girard is Legislative Counsel with the Department of Justice. The Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment is considering the bill for proposed amendments to the Public Highways Act in continuance with the October 14th, 2020 hearing. So the Public Highways Act governs, among other things, the construction, maintenance, access, and use of highways within the Northwest Territories. This proposed bill will amend the Public Highways Act to address the government of the Northwest Territories' liability for loss or damage resulting from a failure to maintain primary highways in the Northwest Territories. The bill will make it clear that the minister has no duty to maintain roads that are not designated as primary highways under the Public Highways Act. So this concludes my opening remarks regarding this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Does the committee have any general comments or questions on Bill 3? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know committee has a number of proposed amendments that I thank the minister and her staff for agreeing to and working together to bring this bill to its original intention. In general, I'm supportive of the bill, but I do note that I think it causes some unintended consequences. The one I am most specifically concerned about is that the Giant Mine Access Road is not presently designated a primary highway in the regulations. As such, in the passing of this bill, the GNWT will no longer have a duty to maintain the Giant Mine Access Road or have any liability on it. This is a bit of a holdover in that road used to be the primary highway, and then when the highway was rerouted, it maintained GNWT a road, but it's not designated as a primary highway any longer. I think this is particularly concerning given that there's a multi-billion-dollar remediation project going on, and we're moving hundreds of thousands of tons of rock to Giant Mine. So I think the GNWT needs to be very clear that it has a duty to maintain that road, and the way it has to do that now is to amend the regulations to include it. So my question is the minister willing to commit to including the Giant Mine access road as a primary highway? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for the delay. That is a good question. It's hard for me to commit right now to including this on the list, but we are open to considering this as one of the access roads. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. I guess before third reading and before this bill is brought into force, I would like to have an answer from the department on that. Because I'm not willing to bring this bill into force and then not have any liability or duty to maintain that road. And, yeah, so if the department could take that back and get back to committee, I think it's very important that we clarify the status of that road. Perhaps can I have a bit more understanding of why the minister's not willing to make that commitment? Is there conversations about perhaps giving that control of that road over to the city of Yellowknife? Is that part of the dispute? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if I could just get clarification from Jacques on, one of the reasons why this is not on the list, and just for further clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Okay, next. Okay, Mr. Roberts, yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
Yes.
Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the MLA, and we thank the MLA for his question, it is a complex issue that needs to be looked at and carefully considered, and that is why we're not in a position to provide a response today, but we'll do all the necessary efforts to respond as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Johnson, you want to reply?
No, I look forward to the department getting back to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. O'Reilly?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just have some general comments about the bill. As I understood when this was first brought to us as regular MLAs, the idea was that there was a number of winter roads that went off, that were privately constructed, that went off some of our roads, and that there was some concern that we might incur some liability because of those roads, and that we wanted to clarify that through amendments to the Public Highways Act. That's what I had understood was coming. But what we got was not what was certainly what I had anticipated and what I had understood was coming. We had a very complex set of changes, and in my view, that actually made it virtually impossible for anyone in the public to actually sue GNWT for an accident they may have along the highway where we had not properly maintained it or constructed it, designed it, and so on. So it really tipped the balance in favor of the government far too much and took away, I think, people's rights to come after GNWT. So I think we've managed to reach a compromise. There's going to be an amendment that's brought forward that I think will clarify when GNWT has responsibility and doesn't prevent people from bringing forward lawsuits, and I'm in favor of that. I do also want to commend the minister and the department for agreeing to make the standards by which the highways are maintained public. I pushed for that, and as I understand, the minister has ensured that that information is now posted to the website. So I appreciate that very much, and this is the kind of work that we can do as committee to help improve bills, and I appreciate the work of the minister and the department moving forward on this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Thank you for your comments, but give the Minister a chance to respond to. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I hear the members' questions around the Highways Maintenance Manual. It is now available online as a result of our October meeting. I think I think we've shared the link, so that's there. And just in terms around liability, you look at the motion number 3, 9.1 was added specifically around the liability. So that was the request of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Minister. Next on the list, I have Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not to belabor a point, but I just wanted to come back to my colleagues' comments around the Giant Mine Access Road. It is my understanding that that road has structural issues. It's located adjacent to a pit. There's also contaminated sites within access of the road. So to me, I can understand the complexity of why this is an issue. I guess just more of a comment and something I'd like to see included when the department does come back to us with information would be the piece around the federal government's responsibility for that road, given that the site is a federal contaminated site that they are charged with remediating. To me, the access road is part of that, and while it may not actually, trying to think of where the lease boundaries are, if it actually falls in the lease of the Giant Mine or not. However, I still think that there should be a big push for the federal government to take responsibility for that road, considering it might need major structural repairs in the future, especially if we start hauling rocks on it. It will continue to deteriorate even more quickly. So I would advise or maybe just suggest to the minister that she go back to the federal government and ask them to pay for it so we don't have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, absolutely. You know, if and where we can seek federal funding to be able to assist with any remediation. I mean, you know, the government of the Northwest Territories should not be responsible for, you know, for any of this work that's been caused by the federal government in terms of the Giant Mine and some of the remediation. So yes, Mr. Chair, that is something, you know, the department will need to look at. I mean, you know, that from my understanding, that used to be part of Highway 4. So it is something that we need to look at. And, you know, perhaps maybe that's one of the reasons why we weren't able to be able to answer so quickly on, you know, including that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Does committee have any other general comments on Bill 3 or questions for the Minister? Seeing none, does committee now agree to do a clause-by-clause review of Bill 3 to act to amend the Public Highways Act? Committee agree? Agreed? Okay. We'll defer the title of Bill 3 until the end and begin with the consideration of clause-by-clause. There are 2 clauses. Please turn the page to the bill, clause 1. Does committee agree? Agreed. Clause 2. Does committee agree? Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move that Clause 2 of Bill 3 be amended by adding the following immediately before proposed subclause 21.1 brackets 10. 9.1. For greater certainty, subsection 9 does not bar an action brought against the government of the Northwest Territories for the recovery of damages caused by an alleged failure to maintain in a reasonable state of repair any wall, fence, guardrail, railing, curb, pavement markings, traffic control device, illumination device or barrier adjacent to or along or on the highway. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Motion's in order to the motion. Okay, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just very briefly, this is the clause that does, I think, start to right that balance. Otherwise, if this clause was not in here, members of the public would basically be unable to try to sue GNWT for not maintaining a highway. And now we have the standards posted to the website thanks to the minister. So I think this provides for a reasonable balance of rights and interests, and very happy that that the committee supports this and that we're going to move forward with this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. To the motion. Motion's in order to the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion's carried. Motion's carried. Does the minister concur with the amendment? Madam Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remain supportive of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. So that's a yes. Okay,
Sorry,
Minister.
Mr. Chair, yes.
Okay, thank you. Minister concurs with the amendment. Clause 2 will be amended to the clause 2 as amended. MLA, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to Clause 2, I move that Clause 2 of Bill 3 be amended in the English version of the proposed paragraph 21.1 sub 9 sub A by striking out pavement comma markings and substituting pavement markings.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Motion's in order to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for explanation, I believe this was a drafting error and that the language in this clause is exactly as used in other jurisdictions. However, a comma was left out such that we would not have a duty to maintain pavement comma markings. And I can tell you that the duty to maintain the pavement is very much part of our legislation, but that the pavement markings are a slightly different standard than pavement itself. So perhaps one of those good legal drafting things about the importance a comma can make. I can foresee if we didn't catch this, that some lawyer would be arguing over the existence of a comma in a court case. So I'm glad to move this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Motion's in order to the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you. Motion's carried. Does the minister concur?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I concur.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Yes, again, that's good too today. Starting a good day today. Clause 2 is amended. Yeah, Mr. Bonner-Trush.
I move that Clause 2 of Bill 3 be amended in proposed subclause 21.1 bracket 8 by striking out provides and substituting proves.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner-Trush. Motion's in order to the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed, Madam Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I concur.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you. 3 today, already good.
that's
Thank
3
you.
today. I'm done with yeses.
No. Okay, thank you, Madam Minister. Motion's carried. The Minister concurs the amendment Clause 2 will be amended to Clause 2 is amended. Does committee agree? Agreed. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next motion is dear to my grammar-loving heart. Mr. Chair, I move that Clause 2 of Bill 3 be amended in the English version of proposed subclause 21.1 bracket 10 by striking out the to the minister and substituting to the minister. Thank you.
Ms. Knockleby. Motion's in order to the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Madam Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I concur.
today.
YES.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Motion's carried. The Minister concurs with the amendment. Clause 2 will be amended to Clause 2 as amended. Does committee agree? Agreed. Thank you. We'll now return to the bill number and title, Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act. Does committee agree? Agreed. The bill as a whole, does committee agree? Agreed. A lot of agreeing going on. It's good today. Does committee agree to Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act is now ready for consideration of Committee of the Whole as amended and reprinted? Agreed. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act, be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Sorry, as amended and reprinted because we amended it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Motion's in order to the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Madam Minister? Oh, don't have to this time, but she'll say yes. Okay,
I
thank you.
concur.
Okay, thank you. 5 yeses, thank you. So question has been called. All those in favor? Agreed. The motion is carried. Bill 3, an act to amend Public Highways Act, is reported to the Assembly and ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole as amended and reprinted. Thank you, Minister, and your officials for joining us here this afternoon. Minister Archie, do you have any closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I thank you as chair and colleagues for going through this bill with us today. And on behalf of myself and the department, thank you very much, and we'll have a good day. We'll see you guys soon.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Minister. Have a good afternoon. See you in the House. This concludes our meeting. Now we can have a motion to adjourn. Mr. O'Reilly. Thank you, colleagues. Good meeting. Anything else you want to bring up?